Why did Willie Nelson wait until the age of 92 to finally tell the truth about Johnny Cash? For decades, the world saw them as legends. Two wild spirits with guitars and grit, drifting in and out of smoky bars, blazing through stages, and rewriting country music forever. But behind the records, the cowboy hats, and the grainy black and white photos was something deeper, something raw, something painful. Their friendship wasn't just a duet, it was a lifeline. And according to Willie himself, there were things he never said, not to the press, not to fans, not even to Johnny's family, until now. What started in a dimly lit bar in Nashville ended in a phone call that still haunts Willie to this day.
I first started noticing Johnny Cash back in, it had to have been the 50s maybe. I was a great fan of his, not only for his music, but for his...
A call he's kept private for over 20 years. A call he says was the real goodbye. Not the one with the flowers and the cameras, but the one filled with silence, regret, and something he can't quite explain. There were nights Willie had to carry Johnny. Literally. Nights when the pills, the pain, and the past almost took him. And there were nights Johnny carried Willie too. Emotionally. Spiritually. Back from places too dark to sing about. Some say Johnny Cash saved country music. But Willie says he was also trying to save himself, and in doing that, they saved each other. This isn't just a story about two artists. It's about two men who leaned on each other when no one else understood the weight they were carrying. And now, in the final chapter of his life, Willie is finally ready to reveal the story only he could tell. The one that never made it into a song. But once you hear it, you'll never hear their music the same way again. Before they were icons, before their names were etched into the history of American music, Willie Nelson was just another young man with a deep love for country songs and a day job spinning vinyl in a small Texas radio station. The year was the mid-1950s. Willie, then in his early 20s, was working as a DJ in places like Hillsboro and Fort Worth, taking phone requests, playing hits for truckers, and late-night romantics. And then one afternoon, a new voice came crackling through the studio speakers. A voice that didn't sound polished, or commercial, or safe. It sounded haunted. And the song? Hey Porter. It was the first time Willie Nelson heard Johnny Cash. That single moment stopped him cold. He didn't just hear the beat or the lyrics. He felt something behind it. There was a tension, a grit, like a man trying to outrun something chasing him. Willie didn't know who Johnny Cash was yet. Not really. But in that low, steady voice and stark, punchy rhythm, he heard pain. Real pain. The kind you don't fake in the studio. The kind you carry in your bones. Years later, Willie would say, that voice, it sounded like it had been places. Hard places. He started spinning Johnny's records more and more, often slipping in Folsom Prison Blues and I Walk the Line, even when it wasn't in the playlist. He believed people needed to hear that kind of honesty. But even then, back when they were still strangers, there was a strange sort of kinship. Willie, too, was a wanderer. His life had already been full of poverty, broken homes, and failed attempts to break into Nashville's inner circle. He knew what it meant to be rejected, to write songs that nobody wanted. And in Johnny's early recordings, there was a familiar restlessness, a voice that didn't just sing to people but sang for them. For the outlaws, the working men, the drifters, the broken-hearted, and the misunderstood. In those early years, Willie often thought of Johnny as a kind of mirror, but a distant one. Someone living a life just as rough, just as ragged, but walking a few steps ahead. I always felt like he was doing what I wanted to do, saying what I wanted to say, Willie once said. And that admiration only grew, not just because Johnny's records were climbing the charts, but because he was doing it his way. Ignoring Nashville norms, breaking rules, singing about prison and pills when everyone else was writing love songs. That kind of defiance, that rawness. It inspired Willie, even if they had never met. But fate wasn't finished with them. Years passed. Willie left DJing behind and started climbing his own musical mountain, writing songs like Crazy and Nightlife, still chasing that same kind of honesty he heard in Johnny's voice. And then, one night in Nashville in the early 60s, In a bar lit with neon and filled with cigarette smoke and twangy guitars, Willie finally met the man who had unknowingly changed the way he heard music forever. But what started as a casual handshake turned into something neither of them expected. A friendship that would outlive the spotlight, the fame, and even death itself. Because that first song Willie ever heard, it wasn't just the beginning of Johnny's career. It was the first note of a bond that would echo for the rest of their lives. It happened quietly. No press, no cameras. Just a dim bar on the edge of Nashville. The kind of place where the jukebox was always broken, the beer was cheap, and every booth had a story it would never tell. Willie Nelson was still trying to make it. He had a few songs under his belt, a few record labels interested, and a lot of late nights wondering if this was all a mistake. Johnny Cash, on the other hand, was already a name. People knew him, respected him, maybe even feared him a little. But that night, when the door creaked open and Johnny walked in, none of that mattered. Because he didn't come in like a star. He came in like a man looking for someone who understood. They didn't recognize each other at first. Willie was used to seeing Johnny on album covers, not 3 feet away nursing a whiskey. But when someone introduced them, the air shifted. Willie stood, shook Johnny's hand, and in that first grip, firm, quiet, unflashy, something passed between them. Not friendship, not yet. Something deeper. Recognition. As if they'd both been walking the same road in opposite directions and finally crossed paths. The conversations started slow. Guitars, touring, radio stations, but then it turned. They started talking about fear, about failure, about the industry, people who tried to change them, soften them, commercialize their sound until it didn't even feel like theirs anymore. Willie told Johnny about the songs no one wanted to buy. Johnny told Willie about the loneliness that came with success, the emptiness after the applause. And somewhere between the second drink and the third, they realized they weren't just musicians, they were survivors. 2 men clinging to music like it was a lifeline. That night, they didn't just talk, they played. Someone handed Willie a guitar. Johnny tuned it instinctively. No plan, no set list. Just fingers on strings and words that hadn't been written yet. Willie's looseness, Johnny's precision. It was like watching opposites create harmony in real time. People in the bar stopped talking. Some leaned in, some just closed their eyes. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. By the time the bar closed, they hadn't said goodbye. They didn't need to. They just nodded, lingered, and walked out into the Tennessee night with something unspoken but undeniable. Willie later said, "We didn't make a deal. We didn't plan a duet. We just found something in each other we didn't know we were missing." What started as a spontaneous jam session turned into years of songwriting, recording, and late-night phone calls that no one else ever heard. But that first meeting was the seed, not of a partnership, not even a collaboration, but of a bond that would outlast their own careers. A bond not built on fame or money, but on the quiet realization that each man, in his own way, was broken. And in that bar, for the first time, they didn't feel alone. That night wasn't the start of a musical alliance. It was the beginning of a friendship that would redefine both of their lives. But as their paths grew closer, so did the shadows chasing them. Because while the world saw legends behind closed doors, Johnny Cash was already spiraling, and Willie Nelson was about to become the one person who wouldn't walk away when things got ugly. By the late 1960s, Johnny Cash was at war. With the industry, with his own past, and most dangerously, with himself. The man who had electrified America with Folsom Prison Blues and Ring of Fire was slipping deeper into a spiral of pills, isolation, and erratic behavior that left even his closest friends shaken. His performances became unpredictable, his mood swings sharper. Behind the confident stage persona was a man crumbling under the weight of fame, regret, and chemical escape. And while most in Nashville whispered about him from a distance, one man refused to turn away: Willie Nelson. Willie wasn't blind to what was happening. He'd seen it before. Other artists burning out too fast, too young. But with Johnny, it felt different. It wasn't just the drugs or the long disappearances or the angry outbursts. It was the sadness, the kind that settled in someone's bones, the kind that couldn't be sung away. Willie, who had his own scars and demons, recognized the look in Johnny's eyes, the hollow stare of a man who wasn't sure he wanted to keep going. One story, whispered among old-timers, speaks volumes. Johnny had gone missing for days. No one could reach him. The label was panicking. His wife, June Carter, was worried sick. Some thought he'd gone out to the desert again. Others feared the worst. But it was Willie who tracked him down. Holed up in a cabin in the woods, surrounded by empty bottles, half-conscious and dangerously thin. No cameras, no press, just Willie, knocking on the door, guitar slung over his shoulder, and a bag of food in his hand. He didn't lecture, didn't cry. He just sat down, opened a window to let the light in, and said, "Let's write something, man. You've still got music in you." That wasn't the only time. Willie had this quiet way of showing up when it mattered most. No fanfare, no expectations. When Johnny was arrested for trying to smuggle pills across the Mexican border, it was Willie who visited, not to scold him, but to remind him who he was. When Johnny crashed on stage from exhaustion, it was Willie waiting backstage with a towel and a look that said, "You're still my brother." But loyalty like that came at a cost. Industry people warned Willie to keep his distance. "You'll go down with him," one executive said. Willie didn't care. "If he goes down, I'll be the one pulling him back up," he reportedly replied. Johnny knew it too. In his rare moments of clarity, he'd call Willie. Sometimes just to listen to him breathe, sometimes to talk about nothing at all. He once said in an interview, "There's only a few people I'd call when I don't trust myself." Willie's always been one of them. By the early 1980s, something strange was happening in country music. The legends weren't fading away, they were regrouping. At a time when the industry was shifting toward glossy production and younger faces, a bold idea was floated. What if four of the genre's most rebellious voices, Johnny Cash, Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, and Chris Christopherson, joined forces? Not just for a song, but for an entire movement. The idea sounded crazy. Too many egos, too many addictions, too much baggage. But that was the point. They weren't supposed to work together, which is exactly why it did. They called themselves the Highwaymen, a name that spoke to their outlaw roots, their restlessness, and their refusal to be tamed. The first time they stood together in the studio, it felt electric. Four legends in one room, each carrying decades of scars and stories. But beneath the surface, things were tense. Johnny was still recovering, physically, emotionally, from years of breakdowns and relapse. Waylon was battling his own demons and unpredictable outbursts. Chris brought a poetic, political energy that didn't always blend. And Willie? He was the glue, the peacemaker. The one with a smile wide enough to disarm a room and the patience to hold it together when things threatened to explode. From the outside, fans saw four country icons making magic. Behind the scenes, it was chaos. Recording sessions would stall for hours while Waylon ranted or Chris disappeared to rewrite lyrics. Johnny, often quiet but deeply sensitive, would shut down when the tension got too thick. There were arguments over phrasing, arrangements, and even who stood where in the album cover photos. One session nearly fell apart after Johnny stormed out, frustrated that no one was listening to his ideas. Willie followed him outside and found him sitting in the van, eyes closed, fists clenched. "We can walk," Johnny said. "We can leave now, start our own thing." Willie just laughed and said, "We already are our own thing. That's the problem." Despite the friction, or maybe because of it, the music was unforgettable. Their debut song, Highwayman, wasn't just a hit. It was a mission statement. A story of four souls reincarnated across time, refusing to disappear. It was poetic. It was dark. And it was real. Each man took a verse, and when they sang together, it felt like history bending to their voices. But even that harmony didn't erase the pressure. The label expected them to tour, to deliver album after album, to act like a real band. But they weren't a band. They were four solo acts barely holding themselves together. Willie once said, "We weren't a machine. We were four storms trying not to collide." And yet somehow they managed to channel all that turbulence into something beautiful, something honest. Still, it was hard. Johnny struggled with stamina on the road. His health was declining, and some nights he'd lose his voice before the third song. Willie would quietly rearrange the set list behind the scenes to take the pressure off him. No announcement, no pity, just loyalty. Waylon, unpredictable as ever, would sometimes show up late or forget lyrics altogether. Chris would fight with the management. And through it all, Willie kept showing up. Steady, centered, and stubbornly optimistic. The Highwaymen were a storm, no doubt, but they were also a shelter. For each other, for their fans, and for the pieces of themselves that hadn't found peace yet. They weren't there to impress anyone. They were there to survive, to sing, before it was too late. But not every performance was a triumph. Not every tour ended in applause. And on one night in particular, everything nearly fell apart. A night where Johnny cracked on stage, Willie had to step in, and their friendship was pushed to its absolute limit. It was supposed to be just another night on the road, another stop in a long line of sold-out Highwaymen shows. The crowd was buzzing, the stage lights warmed the floor, and backstage, guitars were being tuned. But somewhere in the chaos, something wasn't right. Johnny Cash had been quiet all day. Not the usual pre-show calm, but something deeper, withdrawn, fidgety. The kind of silence that warned everyone around him to keep their distance. Willie saw it the moment he walked into the dressing room. Johnny was sitting alone, head down, hands clenched, eyes dark. They'd been on tour for weeks, and it was wearing thin. The endless travel, the media obligations, the pressure to live up to their legend. But that night, it was more than just exhaustion. Johnny was unraveling. Willie, always the steady one, tried to lighten the mood, cracking a joke, offering him a drink, asking about his guitar tuning. Johnny barely responded. "Let's just get it over with," he mumbled. Then he stood up and walked toward the stage. The first few songs went smoothly. Johnny's voice, though raspier than usual, still carried that unmistakable weight. But when it came time for his solo, one of the emotional centerpieces of the set, something snapped. Midway through the second verse, Johnny stopped singing. He just stared out into the crowd, not angry, not panicked, just hollow. Then, without a word, he turned, walked off stage, and disappeared into the wings. The audience froze. The band kept playing, awkwardly trying to cover the gap. Waylon looked confused. Chris looked furious. But Willie didn't hesitate. He handed his guitar to a stagehand and followed Johnny. He found him in a dark hallway, pacing like a caged animal. His hands were shaking. "I can't do this," Johnny said. "I can't fake it tonight." Willie didn't argue. He didn't try to convince him to go back out. He just stood there, quietly. After a long pause, he said, "Then don't fake it. Let's go out and be real." Johnny shook his head. "They paid to hear the songs, not to watch me fall apart." Willie smiled. "Then, let's give them both." Minutes later, the two men returned to the stage. No big announcement, no excuse. Just two old friends, side by side. They scrapped the set list and played what felt right. Slower songs. Raw songs. At one point, Willie took the lead and Johnny backed him with soft harmonies, something they'd never rehearsed. The crowd didn't cheer louder. They just listened harder. Because for the first time that night, the show wasn't about legends. It was about survival. By the late 1990s, the Highwaymen weren't touring anymore. The fire that once blazed on stage had dimmed into something softer, something more fragile. The calls became less frequent. The collaborations slowed, but the bond between Willie and Johnny never truly faded. It just shifted into something quieter, something harder to see from the outside. To most fans, it seemed like the duo had simply grown apart. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was that Johnny Cash was dying. Slowly, quietly, and with a kind of dignity that made his silence feel heavier than any song he'd ever sung. His voice, once booming and unshakable, had grown thin. His hands, once strong enough to command a crowd with a single chord, began to tremble. Years of illness, surgeries, and physical pain were taking their toll. He'd already lost June, the love of his life. And after her death in 2003, something in Johnny broke for good. He stopped writing. He stopped performing. Even close friends were kept at a distance. He didn't want to be remembered as a man wasting away. He wanted to leave on his terms. Willie, for a while, respected the distance. He knew Johnny. He knew that sometimes the strongest thing a man can do is disappear. But eventually, the silence grew too loud to ignore. He started calling again, leaving voicemails. "Just checking in, brother," he'd say. Sometimes Johnny wouldn't answer. Other times he'd pick up, but say very little. "Still here" was one of the last things he ever said on the phone. Just 2 words, but they hit like a hammer. There was one call, though, that stood out. A late-night conversation that Willie never talked about publicly, not for years. He described it later as the real goodbye. The one where both men stopped pretending everything was okay. Johnny's voice was weak, barely a whisper. He asked Willie if he remembered the first night they met. Willie did. Johnny said, "That was the first time I felt safe." There was a long pause. Then he added, "You never asked for anything from me. You just stayed." Willie didn't cry. He didn't tell him to fight harder. He just said, "You gave me more than I ever gave you." That was the last time they spoke. When Johnny Cash died on September 12, 2003, the world mourned a legend. Tributes poured in. Documentaries aired. Songs were re-released. But Willie didn't speak to the press right away. He stayed silent for days. Maybe because he didn't want to share the grief. Maybe because some friendships are too sacred for soundbites. When he did finally speak, he kept it simple. "He was my friend," Willie said. "That's all that matters." But the silence that followed was different. He still played the old songs, still carried that same calm on stage. But if you watched closely, you'd notice he never quite smiled the same way when he played the ones they used to sing together. There was a weight in his voice, a crack in the chords. As if Johnny's absence wasn't just felt, it was heard. Willie Nelson has never been one for long speeches. He's lived a life of simplicity. Guitars, quiet jokes, rolled cigarettes, and moments that speak louder than any interview. But now, at 92 years old, something's different. He's still touring, still playing, still laughing. But when he speaks about Johnny Cash these days, there's a softness in his voice that wasn't there before, like time has finally loosened something he kept locked away for too long. In a recent rare interview, Willie finally opened up about those final days. Not to sensationalize, not to profit, just to remember. And for the first time, he shared the parts of their friendship that had lived only in silence. He spoke about letters they wrote but never sent, about jokes they shared that only made sense at 3 a.m. after a bottle of whiskey, about the moments Johnny was too tired to speak, and all Willie could do was strum a guitar nearby, letting the music say what words couldn't. But then came the part that made everyone in the room go quiet. Willie reached into his jacket and pulled out an old cassette tape, faded, scratched, barely labeled. "This," he said, "was Johnny's last message to me. I've never played it for anyone until now." The room held its breath. He didn't play at all, just a few seconds. Just enough to hear Johnny's voice, raspy and slow. "Will, if I don't make it, you gotta tell them. Not about me, about us, about what we tried to do." Willie paused, swallowed hard. I think he knew. He wasn't just saying goodbye. He was asking me to finish the story. And so, after decades of deflecting, after years of keeping the hardest parts private, Willie is finally talking. Not about Johnny the icon, but about Johnny the friend. The one who cried late at night when no one was looking. The one who told Willie he didn't think he deserved forgiveness. The one who once said he felt like he was born with too much weight in his heart, and music was the only way to carry it. Willie also shared something else. A line Johnny scribbled on a napkin during one of their last hangouts. A line so simple, yet so devastating. It read, "We sang for survival, not for applause." Willie kept it folded in his wallet for years. Still does. This isn't about legacy anymore, or charts, or awards. Willie doesn't need any of that. What he's doing now, sharing these stories, peeling back the curtain, isn't for fans. It's for Johnny. For the man who stood beside him in bar rooms and arenas, in hotel rooms and hospital rooms. For the man who, through every breakdown and every comeback, always found his way back to the music, and to Willie. In the end, when all the lights go out and the applause fades into silence, what stays behind are the memories, the real ones. Not the ones captured on stage or broadcast on TV, but the ones that live in quiet moments between friends. For Willie Nelson, those are the memories that matter most. And if you ask him today what he remembers about Johnny Cash, it's not the fame, it's not the hits, it's not the legend. It's the man who once sat beside him on a porch with no cameras, no script, and a sky full of stars, talking about whether they'd still be playing music in heaven. There's one story Willie tells now, quietly, like a secret he's finally ready to share. It happened not long before Johnny's health took a final turn. They were backstage, alone, waiting for a show that never ended up happening. Johnny wasn't feeling strong enough to perform. He was leaning back in a chair, guitar resting on his chest like it weighed 100 pounds. Willie looked over and said, "You ever think about stopping?" Johnny looked at him, smiled that half smile of his, and said, "No, I think about disappearing, but not stopping." It was one of the last times they were ever alone together. And now, years later, it's that sentence that Willie says replays in his mind the most. Disappearing, but never stopping. Because in some way, Johnny never really did stop. His voice still plays. His words still linger. And his friendship, his complicated, painful, beautiful friendship with Willie Nelson, still shapes the man Willie is today. They didn't always get it right. There were missed calls, years lost to silence, nights where neither could find the words to say what they needed to. But through it all, the bond never broke. And now, as Willie looks back, he's not trying to rewrite the past. He's just finally ready to share it, to show the world the version of Johnny Cash that only a true friend could see. Not the outlaw, not the myth, but the man who was scared, stubborn, brilliant, and kind. Their legacy isn't just carved into country music. It's woven into the soul of American storytelling. Two men who didn't just sing about broken roads and redemption. They lived it. And now, one of them carries the story for both of them. Willie still tours, still sings, still tells jokes on stage like he's got all the time in the world. But when he plays Highwayman, you can see it in his eyes. He's not just playing for the crowd. He's playing for the man who used to stand stage left, in black, nodding to the rhythm, singing just behind the beat. The man who disappeared, but never truly left. And maybe that's the lesson after all. Legends fade. Voices go quiet. But true friendship, real, weathered, tested friendship, echoes. It echoes in the music, in the silence, in every story that's finally told. And in Willie's case, it echoes in every note he plays. For Johnny, for them, for us.